Please, sir, she's all I have left." The boy's voice cracked under the weight of sorrow too heavy for his 12 years. His tiny fingers clutched at a wilted bouquet, petals falling one by one as if the world itself was abandoning him. His eyes shimmered with tears that refused to fall, a fragile dignity battling against despair. Adrian Holt should have walked past. Men like him didn't stop for broken children on street corners. He had meetings waiting, wealth flowing like rivers, a woman who adored him waiting in silk at home. Yet at that moment, nothing in his glittering empire felt steady. Because when he looked into that boy's trembling gaze, something buried, deep in his chest stirred, an ache he thought time had buried forever. What would you give if the only soul you couldn't afford to lose was fading away before your eyes? Would you trade fortune for a second chance? Would you kneel where pride told you to stand tall? Before we go further, welcome to Mr. Ross' Story Trail. If your heart beats for stories that don't just entertain but leave you changed, subscribe now. Because this tale will tear you apart and stitch you back together. Adrian's throat tightened. The boy's plea echoed in his mind, louder than the traffic, louder than the hum of power that usually guided his steps. His eyes lingered on the child's face, hollow cheeks, lips quivering with words too fragile to speak again. And in that innocence, Adrian felt the sting of recognition. A reflection of someone he once cherished, someone who had once clung to him with the same desperate faith. For years, Adrian had built walls higher than the towers his empire owned. Behind them, he hid every trace of softness, every crack where longing might slip through. Yet here it was, breaking him down in an instant, the memory of Clara, the woman whose laughter had once been the rhythm of his days, whose absence had carved an emptiness no amount of riches could ever fill. The boy's voice trembled again, tugging at a wound Adrian had buried. "She can't breathe sometimes. I don't know who else to ask." It should have been easy to walk away, but his pulse betrayed him. His chest ached, as though fate itself was pressing his past and present into the same cruel moment. Adrian's fingers twitched at his side, restless, betraying the calm mask he wore so well. A lifetime of discipline told him to keep walking, to let the boy's voice dissolve into the night like every other desperate call that had ever brushed against his wealth. But the truth was merciless. He couldn't. The child's eyes held him there, as if an unseen hand gripped his chest and refused to let go. Each word, each trembling breath carried a weight Adrian had spent years pretending no longer existed. He could almost hear Clara's voice in the boy's broken plea, as if time itself had curved backward to confront him with the very love he once abandoned. He should have been strong, but instead, he felt small. A boy of his own past staring back at him, vulnerable, pleading, aching, for a world that had always asked too much and given too little. Adrian swallowed hard, the sound loud in his own ears. This wasn't business. This wasn't a contract or a deal to win. This was something greater, something terrifying, something that whispered he might never be the same again if he chose to listen. The boy's lips trembled as he whispered again, softer this time, almost like a prayer. "Please, save her." His eyes shimmered with the raw light of faith, the kind that believes even the coldest heart can be warmed. Adrian turned his face slightly, hoping to escape the weight of that gaze. But it clung to him, seeping into the cracks he had fought to seal shut. Behind the boy's voice lived the shadow of a woman he had never truly let go of. Clara. Her name burned silently on his tongue, her memory rising like a tide he couldn't resist. Adrian's chest tightened, the ache spreading through every vein. He could still see Clara's smile in the boy's features, still feel the echo of her touch, the nights they had once shared when love was all they needed to survive. And now, fate had brought her son, their son. No, not yet. But the thought pierced him like glass. The world knew Adrian Holt as untouchable. Yet in this moment, before a fragile boy and the ghost of a love unfinished, he was anything but strong. He was breaking, and destiny was about to demand everything. Adrian's vision blurred, not from weakness, but from a truth too sharp to contain. In the boy's plea, he felt the strike of every regret he had buried. The empire he had built suddenly felt hollow, like walls without a home inside. Because what good was fortune if it couldn't keep alive the one person who had once made life worth living? His breath caught, his jaw clenched, yet his heart whispered what his pride feared. This boy's tears were not a stranger's. They were his reckoning. And now, I must ask you, if the person you once loved stood at the edge of life and their child begged you for mercy, what would you do? Would you close your eyes to protect yourself? Or open your arms, knowing it might break you? Stay with me, because what follows is not the story of a powerful man. It's the story of how love, sacrifice, and forgiveness stripped him bare. And by the end, you will see why even a millionaire cannot hide his tears. Before we begin, welcome to Mr. Ross Story Trail. If you believe in stories that change the way you see love and life, subscribe now. Elian was only 12, yet his days carried the weight of a man far older. Each morning, before the sun lifted its face to the sky, he was already awake, tiptoeing across the uneven floorboards of the small one-room home he shared with his mother. Clara's breathing was always the first sound he listened for, shallow, uneven, often broken by a cough that shook her fragile body. She tried to hide her pain, but Elian always noticed. He noticed everything. He would tuck the blanket around her thin shoulders, whispering, "I'll be back soon, Mama. Rest, please." And though she forced a smile, her eyes betrayed a truth she never wanted him to see. She was slipping away. Outside, Elian carried a small wooden box filled with trinkets he had gathered, buttons polished until they gleamed, marbles he had found and cleaned, and sometimes wilted flowers he picked from the roadside. He also carried a rag and brush for shining shoes. At 12, this was his empire. His battlefield was the dusty sidewalks, and his hope lay in convincing strangers to part with a coin. Most days, the city walked past him. Tall men in suits never looked down. Women hurried by with baskets in their hands. Children his age ran freely in school uniforms while he knelt on cobblestones, scrubbing away dust from a stranger's leather boots. Still, he greeted each one with the same politeness his mother had taught him. "Good morning, sir. Have a bright day, ma'am." His voice was soft, almost lyrical, and sometimes that alone earned him a coin. Yet what truly set him apart was not the work he did, but the way he carried himself. He never begged. He offered. He tried. His innocence shone even through his hunger. When the day was long and the soles of his shoes wore thinner against the pavement, he would sit by the steps of an old building, open his box, and whisper to himself, "One day, someone will see, someone will help." It wasn't greed in his voice, it was hope. Hope that his mother could be healed, that she wouldn't have to cough through the night, that she could wake up one morning without pain gripping her chest. He didn't dream of riches. He dreamed of medicine, of food enough for her to eat until she was full, of a bed that didn't creak when she shifted. Most of all, he dreamed of her smile, the real one, not the tired one she gave him each evening. At night, when he returned home, Clara would ask, "Did you eat, my Elian?" He would nod, even if he hadn't, setting aside whatever he had earned for her needs first. He would polish her cracked teacup, fetch water, and sit beside her until sleep claimed them both. Elian's secret was simple. He prayed silently that somewhere in the vast city, someone kind, someone powerful, someone who still believed in mercy, would find them. Evenings were Elian's favorite time, not because the day's work had ended, but because he could sit beside his mother again. Their little home smelled faintly of herbs she boiled to ease her coughing fits. He hated that smell, not because it was unpleasant, but because it reminded him that she was fighting a battle her body was too fragile to win. "Tell me, Elian," Clara would whisper, her voice thin yet filled with warmth. "Who did you meet today?" He would smile and recount stories in detail. The man who dropped a coin without a word, the woman who stopped only to pat his shoulder, the little girl who giggled when he offered her a marble. Elian always made it sound brighter than it was because he wanted his mother to laugh, and sometimes she did. A soft, delicate laugh that lit the room like the glow of a candle. But when she coughed, clutching her chest, his small hands would rub her back, his voice steady though his heart quaked inside him. "It's all right, Mama. One day you won't hurt anymore." He said it with such conviction that she would close her eyes and, for a moment, almost believe him. The truth was harsher. Clara's illness was stealing her piece by piece. She grew thinner with each passing week, yet her pride never let her stop working. On days when she had the strength, she would mend clothes for neighbors, her hands shaking as she sewed. "I must do my part," she insisted, though Elian wished she would rest. When she was too weak, he took her place without complaint. He scrubbed, polished, bargained, and carried their survival on his small shoulders. Every coin he earned went into a jar beneath the bed, his private treasury. To others, it was worthless change. To him, it was hope. Late at night, after Clara had drifted to sleep, Elian would kneel by. the jar whispering a promise into the dark. "I'll find someone, Mama, someone who can help. You'll see, you'll smile again." He did not know who that person was or when they would come. He only believed they existed, a soul in the crowd who would see them, not as a burden, but as worth saving. There was a purity in his determination that no hardship could strip away. He was 12, yet he carried love with the strength of a lifetime. And though the world often overlooked him, his heart held a quiet certainty. Kindness still lived somewhere, hidden in someone powerful enough to make a difference. Elian's world was small, built on worn shoes, patched clothes, and whispered prayers. But his love for Clara was vast, larger than the hunger in his stomach or the ache in his tired limbs. That love was his secret weapon, the reason he woke each morning, the reason he endured, and the reason he believed that help, somehow, would come. The city knew Adrian Holt as a man who possessed everything. His name crowned skyscrapers, his companies stretched across continents, and his signature could shift markets in a single day. His office tower pierced the skyline, its glass walls reflecting back the brilliance of power. To outsiders, Adrian was untouchable, a figure whose life must surely be filled with satisfaction. But behind those walls, Adrian lived in silence, the kind of silence that echoed even in crowded rooms. His days were scheduled to the minute, meetings, contracts, dinners with important faces. Smiles were exchanged, hands were shaken, yet the emptiness inside him grew heavier with each victory. Every night, when the city glittered beneath him, he would stand at the window of his penthouse, staring down at the endless flow of lights. To most, it was beauty. To Adrian, it was distance. He had built a kingdom, yet it offered him no warmth. Selina Marlowe was the exception. Intelligent and striking, she carried a calm strength that drew Adrian's guarded heart. Her laughter softened the sharp edges of his world. She often sat curled against him on velvet couches, reading aloud from a book, or speaking of simple dreams, gardens, music, the joy of ordinary days. She adored him, not for his wealth, but for the moments when his walls cracked and she glimpsed the man beneath the empire. She knew his smile was rare, but when it came, it was hers. Yet even Selina could feel it, an untold weight that lingered in his gaze. At times, when she looked into his eyes, she sensed he was somewhere else entirely. A place of memories she did not know, a name he never spoke aloud. Adrian carried it like a secret scar. He never admitted it, not even to himself, but every success he had achieved had been chased by the shadow of what he had lost long ago. Selina's presence was often the only thing that grounded Adrian. She had a way of filling empty rooms with warmth, her laughter lingering like soft music. When she entered, she carried no pretense, no hunger for his wealth. She was simply herself, bright-eyed, attentive, unafraid to challenge him when his silence grew too deep. One evening, as the city shimmered below them, she curled against his shoulder, tracing idle patterns on his hand. "You build towers that touch the sky," she whispered, "but sometimes I wonder. Do you ever feel like you're still reaching for something higher?" Adrian tilted his head toward her, a faint smile crossing his lips, though his chest tightened at her words. She always seemed to sense what he fought to hide. "I've reached more than most men ever dream," he replied quietly, but his eyes betrayed him. They drifted, unfocused, as though searching in the distance for something beyond steel and glass. Selina leaned closer, pressing her lips gently to his cheek. "Then let yourself rest in it," she urged, her voice tender. "You don't always have to carry the weight alone." He pulled her close, his arm wrapping around her as though he might draw strength from her presence. Their intimacy was real, the kind built on trust and quiet devotion. Yet even in her embrace, a part of him remained untouched, guarded, as though bound to a memory he could not let go. Selina felt it, though she never pressed too hard. She loved him enough to wait, to believe that one day he would share the hidden ache that clouded his gaze. Still, when his smile faded and his thoughts wandered, she wondered what past he carried, and whether she could ever heal it. In the eyes of the world, Adrian Holt was a man who had conquered everything, but in the silence of his own heart, he remained incomplete. For all the power in his hands, he longed for something money could never buy: peace, forgiveness, and a love that would quiet the storms he had buried inside. The Grand Hotel gleamed like a palace in the city's heart. Its marble pillars soared, its chandeliers spilled golden light onto polished. Floors and carriages of wealth came and went through revolving glass doors. For most, it was a symbol of luxury. For Elian, it was a battlefield of hope. He stood on the steps outside, clutching his little bundle of flowers, some fresh, others already wilting, their stems wrapped in scraps of ribbon he had found and tied carefully. His other hand held his worn brush, ready for any passer-by who might allow him to polish their shoes. His voice, though soft, carried a strength he had borrowed from his mother. "Fresh flowers, sir. A shine for your shoes, ma'am?" Most swept past him. They didn't see a boy. They saw an interruption. Yet Elian didn't give up. Every person who turned away only deepened his resolve. He had promised his mother he would try, and so he would. That night, the revolving doors parted, and a man stepped out with a presence that stilled even the busy street. Tall, impeccably dressed, with eyes sharp as steel, Adrian Holt. Car waited for him, its polished surface gleaming under the hotel lights. He was the kind of man Elian instinctively knew was powerful, the kind who could change lives with a single command. Without hesitation, Elian darted forward, holding out his flowers. "Sir, please, just one bouquet. It's for my mother. She's very ill." Adrian paused, his gaze falling on the boy. The flowers were nothing, wilted, cheap, unworthy of his notice. Yet something in the boy's eyes held him there for a moment longer than he intended. Innocence, desperation, courage. But then, his voice came cold, practiced. "I don't need flowers, boy." He moved a step past. Elian's chest tightened. He wasn't ready to let this chance slip away. He hurried to Adrian's side, blurting out words that trembled yet struck with force. "Please, sir, she's all I have. If you walk away, who else will help?" The words rooted Adrian to the ground. For the briefest second he faltered, staring at the child who dared to confront him without fear. His driver opened the door to the car, waiting, but Adrian did not move. His heartbeat ticked against his ribs, unsettled by a voice too small to carry such weight. With effort he shook his head, forcing composure back into his expression. "Go home, boy. Life won't change because you chase strangers." His words were firm, but his steps were slower than before as he moved toward the waiting car. Behind him, Elian's voice rang out once more, breaking through the bustle of the night. "I'll keep asking until someone listens." Adrian froze for a heartbeat. His jaw tightened, and without turning he slipped into the car. But as the door closed, the boy's words clung to him, louder than the city outside, echoing in places he thought he had buried long ago. The limousine glided away from the hotel, its tinted glass closing Adrian off from the world outside. Inside, the silence pressed heavier than usual. He loosened his tie, staring straight ahead, but the boy's voice clung to him like a shadow. "She's all I have. If you walk away, who else will help?" Adrian leaned back, exhaling slowly, but it didn't steady him. He had heard pleas before, from employees begging for second chances, from rivals on the brink of ruin. But this was different. There had been no calculation in the boy's words, no agenda, just raw desperation, wrapped in a courage too young to carry it. Across from him, his driver's voice broke the silence. "Home, sir?" Adrian gave a curt nod, but his thoughts refused to obey his command. In his mind, he saw the boy's hands trembling around that bundle of flowers, the way his voice cracked but never faltered. It struck something buried deep, a memory of another time, another face, another pair of eyes that had once looked at him with the same trust. He closed his eyes, but instead of finding calm, he found Clara. The name slid into his heart, uninvited. Clara, with her gentle laughter and unshakable strength, the woman who had once believed in him when he had nothing. He swallowed hard, opening his eyes quickly, as though to drive the image away. But it lingered. The city's lights blurred past the window, glowing but distant, like stars too far to touch. For the first time in years, Adrian felt an ache he couldn't name, a question he couldn't dismiss. Why had the boy's words pierced him so deeply? Why did his voice echo like an old wound reopening? Back at the hotel, Elian remained on the steps, staring at the retreating car until its lights disappeared into the night. His small shoulders slumped, but his jaw tightened. He whispered to himself, steadying his courage, "I'll try again tomorrow. Someone will listen." The determination in his chest glowed against the cold air. He didn't know it yet, but the man who had walked away carried his. Words like a splinter in his soul, one that would not let him rest. And now, dear listener, let me ask you, what would you do in Adrian's place? If a child stood before you, eyes filled with desperate faith, would you stop and listen, or would you walk away? Share your thoughts below, because every heart has its answer. The next morning, Adrian sat at his desk, staring at documents he couldn't read. Numbers blurred before his eyes, meaningless in the face of the memory that had refused to leave him all night. The boy's voice had followed him into his dreams, pulling at him with an urgency he hadn't felt in years. An assistant entered, laying a folder on his desk. "Sir, there's been an inquiry about charitable requests near the hotel district. Would you like me to review them?" Adrian waved him off, but curiosity tugged at him. "Leave them," he said quietly. When the door closed, he opened the folder. His eyes scanned the reports until one line froze him in place: Clara Ramos, requesting medical assistance. The breath caught in his throat. His hand tightened around the paper, as though the name itself might vanish if he didn't hold it. Clara. He whispered it under his breath, the syllables trembling with both wonder and fear. He leaned back in his chair, the world tilting. Could it be? After all these years, after all the walls he had built, fate had brought her back. Through the voice of a boy who had looked at him as if he were the last hope. Memories surged before he could stop them. Clara's laughter under an open sky. The way she used to braid her hair, the strands catching sunlight. Their long walks when they were young and poor, dreaming of a life they would build together. And then, the moment that tore it all apart, his decision to chase ambition, leaving her behind. He had told himself it was for them, for their future, but ambition had swallowed him whole. By the time he looked back, she was gone. Now, she was here again. Not as the radiant girl he remembered, but as a name on a desperate request. And the boy? Her son. Adrian's chest constricted. He pressed his palms over his face, but it didn't hide the truth burning. Through him, the child who had pleaded on the hotel steps was hers. Adrian leaned back in his chair, staring out at the skyline. But what he saw wasn't the city before him. It was the past. The boy's eyes had unlocked a door he had sealed long ago, and behind it was Clara. He remembered the first time he saw her, standing in the market with her arms full of bread loaves, a strand of hair falling loose against her cheek. She had smiled at him, not because he was anyone important, but because she smiled at everyone. That was Clara's gift. She made the world softer simply by being in it. They had been inseparable in those early years. Long evenings spent walking along the edge of the river, shoes in hand, their laughter filling the air. He could still hear her voice when she told him she believed in him, that he was destined for more than the small life they knew. "Go as far as your dreams will take you," she had whispered one night, her hand pressed to his chest. "But promise me, Adrian, don't lose your heart along the way." He had promised. He had sworn it, holding her close beneath the glow of lanterns, their lips brushing in a kiss that felt like forever. But forever had been shorter than either of them imagined. The hunger for success had consumed him. One opportunity led to another, doors opening into a world of power and prestige. At first he told himself it was temporary, that he would return to her when he had built a life worthy of her. But the months stretched into years. Letters unanswered, visits postponed. By the time he returned to the places they had once called theirs, Clara was gone. Her laughter only an echo, her promises left behind with the girl she used to be. Now, decades later, her name lay before him again, not as a dream, but as a plea for survival. And the boy, Elian, Clara's child, a living reminder of everything he had lost, and everything he had abandoned. Adrian's chest tightened with an ache he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. Regret seeped through him, sharp and unrelenting. He had chased the world, but in doing so, he had lost the one person who had given him reason to dream at all. Adrian set the folder down, but his hands refused to steady. The name on the page glowed brighter than the city skyline outside his office. Clara Ramos, the woman he had once loved with every beat of his heart. The woman he had abandoned in pursuit of a dream that had left him hollow. He rose from his chair and paced the length of the room, each step heavy as though the past itself was pressing down on his shoulders. His reflection in the window stared back, the polished suit, the lines etched into his face, the man the world admired. But beneath it all, he saw only the boy who had once promised never to let Clara down. The memory of Elian's voice burned in his ears. "She's all I have." Adrian pressed his hand against the glass, his chest tight. Elian wasn't just a child in need, he was Clara's child. Her son, a piece of her that had survived, even as life tried to take everything from her. And Adrian had walked past him, dismissing him as if he were no one. The weight of regret was unbearable. He thought of the laughter they once shared, the warmth of her hand in his, the nights they whispered dreams of forever. And now forever had come back to him, but in the most fragile form imaginable. A sick woman, a desperate boy, and a truth he could no longer ignore. He whispered her name into the empty room, his voice breaking for the first time in years. Clara. For so long, he had buried her memory beneath success and silence, but fate, cruel and merciful all at once, had placed her son in his path. There was no accident in this. The universe had brought them together again, demanding an answer from him. Would he remain the man who left her behind? Or would he finally face the past, the promises, and the love he had never stopped carrying in secret? Adrian sank into his chair, his head in his hands. For the first time in decades, the man who ruled empires felt powerless. Because love, the kind he had once held with Clara, was stronger than ambition, stronger than wealth, and it was calling him back through the eyes of her child. Selina watched Adrian from across the room, her eyes following the way his shoulders slumped as he poured himself a glass of water. Normally he carried himself like a fortress, tall, unshaken, every step measured. But tonight she saw something different. A heaviness hung over him, as though his thoughts pressed down with a weight she could not see. She set her book aside, rising from the sofa, her silk robe flowing softly behind her. "You've been quiet," she said gently. Her voice wasn't demanding, only an invitation. Adrian turned toward her, the glass in his hand forgotten. His gaze lingered on her face, so open, so steady, and for a moment he almost told her everything. Almost. Instead, he set the glass down, forcing a faint smile. "Long day." Selina stepped closer, her hand brushing against his. "It's more than that. I can feel it." He didn't answer, but she didn't need him to. She slipped her arms around his waist, resting her head against his chest. "You don't have to explain. Just let me be here." For a man who had built walls around himself, Selina was the one person who could slip past them without resistance. Her touch was grounding, her presence unwavering. He lowered his chin, pressing a kiss to her hair, and let himself breathe for the first time that evening. She pulled back slightly, tilting her face to meet his eyes. "Whatever it is, Adrian, you don't carry it alone, not anymore." Her words pierced him in the gentlest way, not like accusation, but like truth spoken with love. He cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing her cheeks, and searched her eyes. She met his gaze without flinching, steady and loyal. In that moment he leaned down and kissed her. It wasn't the passion of fire, but the tenderness of belonging. A kiss that said more than words ever could. "I see you, I trust you, I need you." For the first time in a long time, Adrian felt the ache in his chest soften. He still carried secrets, but with Selina in his arms, the silence didn't feel quite so unbearable. Later that night, the city lights spilled through the tall windows of their penthouse, but inside the room, everything was quiet. Adrian sat on the edge of the bed, his tie discarded, his hands resting heavily against his knees. Selina approached him slowly, her steps unhurried, her gaze never leaving him. "You think I don't notice," she whispered, her hand brushing against his shoulder. "But I do. Every time your thoughts wander, every time your eyes drift somewhere far away, I feel it. And it hurts me only because I want to share the weight with you." Adrian turned slightly, studying her. There was no accusation in her words, only a tenderness that disarmed him. She had a way of speaking that felt less like demand and more like sanctuary. "I don't want you to carry my ghosts," he said at last, his voice rough. She knelt before him, taking his hands into hers. "Then let me stand with you until they fade. That's what love is, Adrian. Not perfection, not answers to every wound, just standing close, no matter how heavy the burden feels." Her eyes glistened as she spoke, and Adrian felt something inside him break, not painfully but like a lock giving way. He pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly against his chest. She fit against him with a natural ease, her warmth pressing against the cold spaces in his soul. Selina lifted her face, her lips finding his once more. This kiss was deeper, slower, filled with the quiet passion of devotion. It wasn't about desire alone, it was about trust, about surrendering to the safety they found in each other. For the first time that day, Adrian allowed himself to close his eyes and lean into her, not as the world's millionaire, but as a man who needed to be loved. When their lips parted, Selina whispered against his skin, "You don't have to tell me everything now. Just know that no matter what you face, I am yours. All of me is yours." Adrian pressed his forehead to hers, his breath uneven. He didn't speak, but in his silence he held her tighter, as if afraid to let go. And for a fleeting moment, the ache of Clara's return dimmed beneath the certainty that in Selina He had found a love that chose him every single day. Adrian stood at the edge of a narrow street, his polished shoes out of place against cracked pavement. Before him was a small, weathered house with peeling paint and a door that leaned on rusted hinges. It was nothing like the towers he owned, but tonight it loomed larger than any skyscraper. His hand trembled as he reached for the door. For years he had faced opponents in boardrooms without flinching, had spoken before thousands without fear. Yet here, before this fragile home, he felt powerless. A faint cough reached his ears through the thin walls. It stopped him cold. He knew that sound. He had heard it before in memories he couldn't silence. Clara's laugh. Breaking into a cough she brushed off, assuring him she was fine. His chest tightened. When the door creaked open, Elian's eyes widened. "You came." The boy's voice was quiet, uncertain, but filled with something Adrian had not seen in years, hope. Adrian knelt slightly, placing a hand on the boy's shoulder. His voice was softer than he expected. "May I see her?" Elian nodded quickly and led him inside. The air smelled faintly of herbs and worn fabric. The room was dim, yet every detail was cared for. A vase of fresh picked, wildflowers on the table, a blanket neatly folded at the edge of the bed. Clara had always found a way to bring grace into simplicity. And then he saw her. Clara lay propped against pillows, her frame thin, her skin pale, yet her eyes still carried the same quiet fire that had once captured his soul. For a moment, time blurred. She wasn't the frail woman before him, but the girl he had kissed beneath. Lantern light, the one who had believed in him when he was no one. Her lips parted, and his name escaped in a whisper. Adrian. The sound nearly broke him. He stepped forward, his throat tight. Clara. Years of distance collapsed in that single exchange. He wanted to say everything at once, every apology, every regret, every word he had swallowed. But his voice failed him, and only silence filled the room. Clara's gaze softened. Despite the years, despite the pain, there was no anger in her eyes. Only a weary kindness that undid him more than bitterness ever could. Adrian's chest ached as he drew closer. The years fell away, yet the weight of them pressed down harder than ever. He knelt beside her bed, his hand hovering for a moment before daring to touch hers. Her skin was cool, delicate, but familiar. "I don't even know where to begin," he murmured. His voice cracked, stripped of its usual control. "I left when I should have stayed. I chased the world, and in doing so I lost the only part of it that ever mattered." Clara's lips curved into the faintest smile, though her breathing trembled. "You were always restless, Adrian. Even then, I knew you would run toward the stars. I just prayed they wouldn't take you too far from yourself." He bowed his head, shame burning in his chest. "I failed you. I failed us." Her fingers squeezed his weakly, a touch so soft yet stronger than his regret. "No. Life happened. Choices, circumstances, they separated us. But I never hated you for it." She paused, coughing lightly before continuing. "What hurt wasn't losing you, Adrian. It was thinking you lost yourself." Tears threatened his composure, but he held her hand tighter. "Clara, if I could undo everything." She shook her head gently. "You can't, and I don't want you to. What's gone is gone. I don't need riches or promises or regrets from you now." Her gaze flicked toward Elian, who lingered quietly in the doorway, watching with wide eyes. "What I want is dignity for him, a chance for him to grow without carrying the burdens I've carried." Her words pierced deeper than any accusation could. She wasn't asking for herself. She wasn't even asking for life. She was asking for her son's future. Adrian turned toward Elian, the boy's innocence etched in every line of his face. He swallowed hard, realizing in that moment what Clara truly meant. This wasn't about rekindling a love long lost. It was about protecting what love had left behind. Clara closed her eyes briefly, whispering, "Don't let him forget that kindness exists in this world." Adrian's heart twisted. For the first time in decades, he didn't feel like the powerful man the world admired. He felt like a man stripped bare, confronted by the only truth that mattered. Love wasn't ownership or ambition, but sacrifice. Adrian bowed his head, fighting the storm building inside him. He had spent years mastering silence, concealing weakness, hiding every trace of longing beneath layers of power. But here, beside Clara, those walls shattered. His shoulders trembled as tears slipped free, not the tears of a boy, but of a man finally facing the truth he had run from. "I should have been there," he whispered hoarsely. Through every sickness, every struggle, every night you were alone, I should have been at your side. Clara's frail hand reached for his face, her touch soft but steady. Adrian, look at me. He lifted his gaze, and her eyes, though dimmed by illness, still carried the light he remembered. We cannot change the path behind us, but we can choose what we do now. Don't waste the time we have left with regrets. Her words struck like a balm, quieting the chaos in his chest. For a moment, he saw her not as the fragile woman before him, but as the same Clara who once believed in him more than he believed in himself. Elian stepped closer, his small hand slipping into his mother's. Adrian watched the boy's devotion, the way he clung to her, and something inside him shifted. This wasn't just about making amends. It was about ensuring that Elian never had to live with the same scars Adrian carried. I will help him, Adrian said firmly, his voice regaining strength. I promise you, Clara, whatever he needs, I'll make sure he has it. Not charity, not pity, but a chance to live with dignity as your son deserves. Clara exhaled slowly, her lips curving into a weary but peaceful smile. That's all I could ask. Silence settled between them, but it was no longer heavy. It was tender, filled with the unspoken forgiveness that only love could grant. Adrian sat there for a long while, holding her hand, watching as her eyelids grew heavy with exhaustion. He realized then that this visit wasn't an ending. It was a beginning, the chance to redeem what he had lost, not by reclaiming the past, but by protecting the future. And dear listener, if this moment touched your heart, do something simple yet powerful, hit the like button. It helps share stories like these, stories that remind us that kindness is never wasted, and that love, in its purest form, is always worth remembering. The night was quiet, broken only by Clara's shallow breaths as she drifted in and out of restless sleep. Adrian lingered near the doorway, his tall frame shadowed by the dim light of a single lamp. He had promised Clara dignity for Elian, but promises alone could not steady the storm raging inside him. As he turned to leave, a soft voice called after him. Wait. Adrian turned. Elian stood in the corner, his small hands clenched at his sides. His eyes, those same eyes that had met his on the hotel steps, were brimming now, shining with tears he could no longer hold back. Please, the boy whispered, stepping closer. Don't go yet. Adrian's chest tightened. Elian. The child's composure crumbled. He rushed forward, his voice breaking. You don't understand. She's all I have. If she leaves me, I don't know how I'll breathe. I don't know how I'll live. His small fists pressed against his eyes, his shoulders shaking. I've prayed every night for someone to come, and when I saw you, I thought, maybe God finally answered. The words cut deeper than any accusation ever could. Adrian reached out instinctively, placing his hands on the boy's shoulders, but Elian pushed forward, clinging to his coat as if afraid he might disappear. Please, sir, you can help her. I know you can. You have the power, you have everything, but I don't have anyone else. Adrian's throat closed. The empire he had built, the walls of pride he had carried for years, none of it mattered. Against the raw plea of a child who loved his mother with everything he had. Don't let her die, Elian begged, his voice rising with desperation. She's the only one who loves me. She's the only one who cares if I wake up tomorrow. Don't take her away from me too. Tears burned Adrian's eyes. He had stood against rivals' storms and losses, but never had he felt so powerless as he did before this boy. The innocence in Elian's voice tore through every defense, dragging out the man Adrian had buried long ago, the man who once loved Clara with his whole heart. Adrian pulled him close, wrapping his arms around the trembling child. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to weep openly. Elian's sobs soaked into his chest, and in that moment, Adrian knew this wasn't a choice anymore. It was destiny demanding his surrender. Adrian held Elian tightly, his heart pounding against the boy's trembling frame. For years, he had believed strength meant never bending, never showing weakness. But now, strength meant something else entirely, holding steady while a child's tears soaked into his chest, while his own tears spilled freely down his face. Elian pulled back, his eyes red, his voice raw. If she goes, I go too. I can't live without her. The words cracked like fragile glass, shattering whatever fragments of Adrian's pride remained. Adrian knelt to meet him at eye level, his hands steadying the boy's shoulders. Listen to me, he said softly, his voice trembling but resolute. Your mother will not be alone. Not while I breathe. I will fight for her with everything I have. Elian blinked, as if trying to understand, as if afraid to believe. Do you mean it? You won't leave us? Adrian's chest tightened at the boy's choice of words. Us. Not just Clara. Not just Elian. Both of them. Together. I mean it, Adrian whispered. His hand brushed across the boy's cheek, wiping away the tears. I can't undo the past, but I can choose what I do now, and I choose to stand with you. Elian threw his arms around Adrian's neck, clutching him as though he had found the anchor he had been searching for all his life. Thank you, he sobbed. Thank you. I knew someone would come. I knew it. Adrian closed his eyes, the boy's faith pressing into his heart like fire. He had built his fortune on contracts, numbers, and logic. But here, in the trembling arms of a child, he discovered the one currency that mattered most: trust. As he rose, Elian still clinging to his hand, Adrian felt the shift within him solidify. This wasn't charity. This wasn't guilt. This was redemption, not for the past alone, but for the future that still could be written. From the doorway, Clara stirred faintly, her weak voice carrying across the room. Elian. The boy turned, rushing to her side, his small hand wrapped in hers. Adrian followed, standing quietly behind them, watching as mother and son exchanged a look of pure, unbreakable love. His heart swelled with both sorrow and resolve. He knew then that no matter the cost, sleepless nights, endless treatment, all the wealth he possessed, he would give it. He would not fail them again. For the first time in decades, Adrian Holt bowed his head, not to power, not to ambition, but to love. Adrian stood at the window, sleeves rolled to his forearms, the city spread beneath him like a map he no longer wished to rule. The vow he had made beside Clara's bed pounded through him with every breath. He heard the soft pad of Selina's steps before he felt her presence. She didn't speak. She came to his side and slipped her hand into his, lacing their fingers without hesitation. He swallowed. I saw someone today, he began, voice low. Someone from long ago. Her thumb traced slow circles on his knuckles, inviting truth without forcing it. Do you want to tell me about her? He nodded. Clara, she's ill. The name caught. Her son, Elian. He asked me to help. Selina turned to face him fully, studying the grief in his eyes. You care for them, she said, not as a challenge, but as a simple, steady truth. I failed her once, he murmured. I won't fail again. But I don't know what this means for us. Selina stepped closer until his breath mingled with hers. It means I stand with you, she said, firm and warm. It means your heart is big enough to love me and still do what is right. It means our future is stronger when it holds mercy. He searched her gaze, expecting doubt, finding courage. Her palm rose to his face. He leaned into it like a man finding water after a long desert. Aren't you afraid? He asked quietly. Only of a world where people turn away from suffering, she answered. That's not our world, not ours. His chest eased, the ache loosening. She guided him to the couch, and when he sat, she climbed into his lap. With familiar grace, legs drawn across him, arms around his shoulders, the tenderness between them deepened, a hush of shared breath and certainty. She pressed a kiss to the corner of his mouth, slow and certain, then another that asked nothing except honesty. He answered with both arms around her waist, holding her as if gratitude itself had found a body. I'm here, she whispered into his skin. Not until it's convenient, until it's done. He exhaled, the first steady breath since Elian's plea. I don't deserve you, he said, voice rough. She smiled, brushing her lips along his jaw. You do, she replied, because you choose love when it costs you something. They moved through the next hour as a pair that knew how to build and to heal. Selina fetched a notepad and set it on his knee. Let's make a plan, she said. Names of doctors, specialists, transportation, nutrition. Whatever Clara needs, we list it, we do it. Adrian watched her write with brisk precision. Hospital contacts, private care options. Tests to request, even soft items, blankets, music, a small plan for the bedside. Compassion, organized, and relentless. He felt awe rise in him, the kind that doesn't shout. It stands quietly and decides to be faithful. You'll come with me? He asked. I'll be beside you, she answered. When the news is good, when it's frightening, when waiting feels endless, I'll hold your hand every time you forget how to breathe. He drew her close again, forehead to forehead. I'm afraid of reopening old wounds, he admitted. Afraid of losing you while I try to save her. You won't lose me, she said, voice steady. Helping Clara is not a threat to us, it is proof of who you are. I fell in love with your strength, yes, but I stayed because I glimpsed this gentleness. Let it lead." She kissed him, and the kiss deepened, a quiet merging of promises rather than hunger for escape. Her robe slipped at the shoulder. His fingers found her skin with reverence, the kind that says, "I choose you again." They stayed there, heart to heart, bodies close, not hurried, not careless, tenderness building in waves of trust. He lifted her carefully, laying her back against the cushions, trailing soft, worshipful kisses along the path of her breath. She answered with sighs that told him he was home. When they joined, it wasn't a question or an apology, it was clarity, an oath sealed with warmth and certainty. Lovemaking became a vow. We face this together. After, she tucked herself beneath his arm, her palm resting over his heartbeat. "Listen," she whispered. "It's steadier." He smiled into her hair. "You did that." "We did that," she corrected softly. "Tomorrow we start early. I'll call the hospital before sunrise. I'll pack a bag for the long day. You speak to your board and clear your calendar." "Done," he said. Selina lifted her head, meeting his eyes one more time. "Adrian Holt, hear me. You are not defined by the years you lost, but by the love you give now. Help Clara. Protect Elian. Come home to me at night. That is our life." He kissed her brow, a promise pressed to skin. "That is our life," he echoed. And for the first time since the past returned, the future felt possible. The following morning, Adrian entered his office not as the businessman the world knew, but as a man with only one mission: save Clara. His assistant rushed forward with schedules and contracts, but Adrian's voice cut through, steady and unyielding. "Clear my calendar." "Indefinitely." The assistant blinked. "Sir, the board will survive without me," Adrian said firmly. "Find the best pulmonary specialists in the country. If they're overseas, bring them here. If they need equipment, buy it. Money isn't a barrier." By noon, his office had become a war room. Phones rang with urgency, medical charts were delivered, and names of doctors filled his desk. Adrian read every page himself, refusing to leave a single detail to chance. Selina sat nearby, fielding calls, her calm efficiency a pillar beside his relentless drive. That evening, Adrian arrived at Clara's home with news. Elian ran to the door, hope written all over his young face. "Did you find someone?" Adrian knelt before him, resting a hand on his shoulder. "Yes, a team of doctors will see your mother tomorrow. She will have the best care." Elian's eyes brimmed with tears. He clutched Adrian's sleeve, his voice breaking. "Thank you, sir. Thank you." Clara, weak but composed, tried to protest when she heard. "Adrian, you owe me nothing." He silenced her with a shake of his head, his voice thick. "I owe you everything. Don't deny me the chance to do what should have been done long ago." Her lips trembled, but she said no more. She allowed him this mercy. The next morning, a sleek car carried Clara and Elian to a private hospital. Adrian walked beside them through polished corridors, his presence a shield against the fear that clung to them. Machines hummed, white coats surrounded them, and Clara's frail body was examined with precision and care. Elian never left her side, his small hand clutching hers. Adrian stood close, his sharp suit out of place in the sterile room, yet his gaze softer than anyone had ever seen. For the first time, power bent not to profit, but to love. The hospital became their new world. Sterile corridors, the beeping of monitors, the hush of nurses' shoes against tile. For Elian, it was terrifying, but he clung to his mother's hand as if his touch alone could keep her tethered. For Adrian, it was a battlefield of patience, where his wealth could open doors, but not guarantee victory. He sat through endless consultations, translating medical jargon into simple words for Elian. "They're doing tests to find out how best to help her," he would explain softly. "This is the beginning, not the end." At night, Adrian refused to leave. He stretched across a chair beside Clara's bed, his tie loosened, his eyes never straying from the rise and fall of her chest. When exhaustion threatened, Selina would appear with coffee or blankets. Her quiet presence a reminder that he wasn't alone in this fight. But even with the best doctors, progress was slow. There were days when Clara seemed stronger, her voice steady enough to tell Elian a story. And there were nights when her breathing grew shallow, and panic clawed at Adrian's chest until he felt powerless again. Through it all, Elian's faith never faltered. He would kneel at the side of her bed, whispering, "You'll get better, Mama. Mr. Holt is helping. You'll see." His words pierced Adrian every time. The boy saw him not as a businessman, not as a stranger, but as a savior. Adrian didn't feel worthy of that trust, yet it fueled him to push harder, demand more, never rest. He stopped attending social galas. He canceled meetings that had once seemed untouchable. His board protested, but he silenced them with a single truth: this is more important. Selina, watching him pace hospital halls at 3 a.m, felt her admiration deepen. She had known his power, but now she saw his heart. A man stripped of ego, stripped of pretense, laying his wealth, his time, his very soul at the feet of a fragile woman and her son. Elian noticed too. One night, when Adrian draped his jacket over the boy's shoulders as he slept in a chair, Elian stirred and mumbled through drowsy eyes, "You're like a father. You don't give up." Adrian froze, those words lodging in his chest like a brand. He looked at the boy, Clara's boy, and for the first time, he let himself consider the possibility that maybe fate had brought them together not by accident, but by design. The days blurred into one another. A cycle of tests, treatments, and prayers whispered into the silence of hospital nights. Then, one morning, a shift came. Clara stirred with more strength than before. Her eyes opened wider, her breathing steadier. Elian was the first to notice, his small hand clutching hers. "Mama," he whispered, trembling with joy. "You're stronger today." Clara smiled faintly, brushing her fingers over his cheek. Maybe I am." Adrian stood at the foot of the bed, his throat tightening as relief washed over him. He had demanded the best medicine, the best care, but no science could explain. The way her recovery ignited something fragile, yet unyielding in the room: hope. The doctors confirmed what Elian had already felt in his heart. "She's responding well," one said. "It will take time, but she's improving." Elian turned to Adrian, his eyes wide and shining. "You did it, sir. You saved her." He threw his arms around Adrian's waist, clinging to him with all the gratitude a child could hold. Adrian's hand rested gently on the boy's back, his chest aching. "No," he thought silently, "you saved me." For it wasn't power or wealth that had carried him through these nights. It was Elian's faith, his refusal to give up. Clara's gaze found his, weary but steady. "You gave us more time," she whispered. "That is more than I ever dared to ask." He couldn't speak, only nodded, swallowing the lump in his throat. That evening, when the hospital quieted and Elian finally fell asleep curled in a chair, Adrian stepped into the corridor. Selina joined him, her hand slipping into his. "You look different," she said softly. "Because for once," Adrian replied, "I feel like I chose right." She leaned into him, her smile gentle. "You did more than choose right. You chose love." Adrian let the words settle, their truth undeniable. He had sacrificed contracts, sleep, appearances, and yet he felt richer than he ever had. Now, dear listener, let me ask you, would you have made the same choice as Adrian? If faced with the chance to save someone from your past, even at great cost, would you step forward or turn away? Share your thoughts in the comments. I read every one, and your voice matters here. The days turned into weeks, and though Clara's body remained frail, the color returned slowly to her cheeks. Her voice grew stronger, no longer carried on shallow breaths but on steadier tones. Every improvement, no matter how small, was a victory to Elian, who celebrated each step as if it were a miracle. Adrian stayed close through it all. His presence became part of their routine, morning consultations with doctors, quiet. Afternoons by Clara's bedside, long evenings watching Elian read aloud to his mother. For the first time in years, Adrian's life was not measured in deals or profits, but in moments. One evening, as sunlight spilled through the window, Clara turned her gaze toward him. She was sitting upright now, her hair brushed neatly, though her frame was still delicate. "You've given me more than I deserve," she said softly. Adrian frowned, shaking his head. "Don't say that. You deserve everything." She smiled faintly, her eyes carrying both warmth and wisdom. "No, Adrian, I don't mean riches, or doctors, or this room. What you gave me was time. Time to see my son grow, to watch his spirit remain unbroken. That is worth more than any fortune." Her words struck him deeper than any accolade he had ever received. For years he had measured his worth by numbers, by empires built. But Clara, the woman who once held his dreams in her hands, now told him his greatest gift was not money, but time. He lowered his gaze, struggling against the weight of his emotions. "Clara, I can't change the past." She reached out, her hand trembling but steady enough to rest on his. "Nor should you. Regret cannot heal us. Only forgiveness can. Her forgiveness, offered freely, disarmed him more than anger ever could. He nodded, unable to speak, afraid that if he opened his mouth, his voice would break. From the corner of the room, Elian looked on, his small face glowing with quiet joy. He had never seen his mother smile this way, not since her illness began. And though he didn't fully understand the history between them, he felt something, powerful, filling the space, as if love itself was mending what years had broken. The evening shadows stretched across the hospital room as Elian sat close to his mother's bed, holding her hand as though it anchored him to life itself. His eyes, though tired, sparkled with a brightness that hadn't dimmed even in the darkest nights. Adrian stepped quietly toward them, carrying a tray of warm broth the nurses had prepared. His gestures, once commanding in boardrooms, were gentle now, careful, almost reverent. He set the tray down, and Clara gave him a grateful nod before resting back against the pillows. Elian turned to Adrian with sudden intensity, his small hands clutched at Adrian's sleeve, his voice breaking through the silence. "Sir, you don't know what you've done." Adrian knelt instinctively, meeting the boy's wide gaze. "Tell me, Elian." Tears welled in the child's eyes, his words trembling with truth. "Every night I prayed. I asked God to send someone who wouldn't walk past us, someone who would see her, really see her. And then you came." His chest rose and fell with uneven breaths, his voice choked with emotion. "You're the answer to my prayers." Adrian's heart stopped. The words slammed into him with the weight of eternity. The boy didn't see a tycoon, a businessman, or a stranger. He saw salvation. He saw hope. "I'm not," Adrian began, but Elian cut him off, throwing his thin arms around his neck, holding on with a strength born of pure love. "You are. You're the reason she's still here. You're the reason I still have her." For a moment, Adrian remained frozen, his arms suspended. And then, as though some dam had burst inside him, he wrapped the boy against his chest and held him tight. Tears burned hot against his eyes, and before he could stop them, they fell. The man who had once stood like stone before the world now wept openly, his shoulders trembling as Elian clung to him. These were not tears of defeat nor shame, but tears of release. Tears that washed away years of regret, of ambition that cost too much, of silence that had weighed too heavily. Clara watched from the bed, her own eyes shimmering. Seeing Adrian's tears, raw, unhidden, softened the ache inside her chest. For so long she had wondered if his heart had hardened beyond recognition, but here he was, broken and whole all at once, cradling her son as if he were his own. In that fragile moment, forgiveness didn't need to be spoken. It simply lived, breathing between them, stronger than any words. Adrian's tears would not stop. They fell against Elian's hair, warm and unrestrained, dripping onto the boy's small hands as they clutched his coat. Years of silence cracked open, and for once he did not try to contain them. He had spent a lifetime commanding his emotions, hiding them behind success and power. But here, kneeling in a hospital room beside Clara and her son, his heart finally spoke the only language it had left: sorrow and love. "I should have been there," Adrian whispered through his tears, his voice thick. "I should never have left her. I should never have left you to fight alone." Elian shook his head against his chest, his arms tightening. "It doesn't matter now. You're here. That's all that matters." Adrian closed his eyes, the boy's innocence undoing him completely. He wept not only for Clara, not only for Elian, but for himself. For the man he had become, for the years wasted in cold ambition, for the mistakes that had cost him so much. Each tear was a release, washing away layers of pride until only the truth remained. Clara's gentle voice rose above the hush. "Adrian." He lifted his head, his vision blurred. Clara's eyes met his, steady despite her frailty. "You don't need to punish yourself anymore. What you're doing now, it is enough, more than enough." Her words fell like balm over his brokenness. He turned back to Elian, stroking the boy's hair, holding him as though he were the most precious thing on earth. And perhaps he was, a living symbol of hope, of a love once lost but not destroyed. For the first time, Adrian allowed himself to feel the fullness of redemption. Not perfection, not the undoing of the past, but the quiet knowledge that he could still choose love, still give, still mend. His tears slowed, though his chest still trembled. He pulled Elian back just enough to look into his tear-stained face. "You gave me back something I thought I'd lost forever," he said. "Thank you, Elian. Thank you for reminding me what it means to be human." Elian smiled faintly through his tears, and Adrian pressed the boy's hand to his heart. As long as I live, you will never be alone. The room grew still, wrapped in the fragile peace that follows storms. For Clara, for Elian, for Adrian, it was not the end, but a new beginning, built not on riches or regrets, but on forgiveness, on compassion, and on the tears of a man who had finally learned how to love again. Months passed, and though Clara remained fragile, she carried herself with grace. She no longer struggled alone. Her son's laughter filled the house, and Adrian's presence became a steady rhythm. He visited often, sometimes with Selina by his side, sometimes alone, but always with the same quiet devotion. Elian began to flourish under the warmth of this newfound security. His shoulders, once weighed down by worry, now lifted with the lightness of boyhood. He studied with focus, his curiosity insatiable, and Adrian made sure he had every resource to nurture that spark. But more than books or lessons, Elian carried something deeper, gratitude. "Mr. Holt," he said one afternoon while helping Adrian carry groceries into the house, "when I grow up, I want to be like you. Not the money part, but the part where you don't give up on people." The words pierced Adrian in the gentlest way, pulling a faint smile to his lips. He rested a hand on the boy's shoulder. "Then you'll be greater than me, Elian, because you already understand what matters most." Selina, watching from the doorway, felt her heart swell. She had chosen to stand beside Adrian through the storm, and now she saw the man he was becoming, not only strong, but tender. Their bond, tested by shadows of the past, emerged brighter. One evening, after leaving Clara's home, Adrian and Selina walked through the park together. The autumn air carried the sound of children playing, and Selina leaned her head against his arm. "You've changed, Adrian," she whispered. "Maybe I've just remembered who I was meant to be," he replied. His gaze drifted toward the horizon. "Clara gave me forgiveness, Elian gave me faith, and you gave me the courage to choose love again." Selina's smile was soft, luminous. "Then keep choosing it, every day." Adrian kissed her forehead, the gesture tender and full of quiet promise. For the first time, he no longer felt haunted by the past. Instead, he felt guided by it, toward a future where kindness carried more weight than ambition ever had. Seasons turned, and time carried them forward. Clara's health never fully returned, but she lived with dignity. Her days brightened by her son's growth and the steady presence of the man she once loved. Adrian ensured her needs were met quietly, never asking for recognition, only showing up with constancy, a hand to steady her, a chair pulled close, a smile that said he was still here. Elian grew into a young man with determination in his eyes. His childhood had been marked by hardship, yet his spirit bore no bitterness. Instead, it carried gratitude. He studied hard, often staying late with books spread across the kitchen table. Adrian funded tutors and opportunities, but Elian never saw it as charity. He saw it as a responsibility to become the kind of man who gave back. One evening, as he prepared for an exam, he looked up at Adrian. "I'll make you proud, both of you. I'll use what you gave me to help others, the way you helped us." Adrian's throat tightened. He reached across the table, clasping the boy's hand. "You already have, Elian." Selina, ever at Adrian's side, remained the quiet strength of his life. She never once saw Clara as a rival, only as a woman who had loved and been loved, whose son had changed all their lives. Together, Selina and Adrian built a bond that was no longer shadowed by regret, but illuminated by the choices they now made every day. On Clara's porch one late afternoon, with Elian standing tall beside her, she whispered, "To Adrian, thank you for giving me more time, for giving him a future." Her smile was faint but full, and in it, Adrian found peace. And so the story did not end with tears, but with healing, because the truth Adrian had learned, and the truth he hoped Elian would carry, was simple yet profound. We cannot rewrite the past, but we can redeem it with compassion, forgiveness, and love. And now, dear listener, if this story touched your heart, I ask you this one thing. Please subscribe to Mr. Ross Story Trail. Share this story so others may find hope in its message. Remember, kindness has the power to rewrite destinies.